The house was quiet when the police arrived. Not the kind of quiet that comes from sleep or routine, but the kind that settles when something has already happened and there is nothing left to interrupt it. The front door stood open. Inside, the lights were on. Family photos lined the hallway. Smiling faces, holidays, birthdays, ordinary moments frozen in frames. A life that looked complete, normal, safe. The officers stepped carefully, their shoes brushing against clean floors, past a neatly arranged living room where nothing appeared disturbed. No broken furniture, no signs of struggle. Just a home that looked exactly the way it always had. Too normal. They moved deeper into the house, past the kitchen, past the stairs, and then they stopped. At the end of a short hallway was a door most people never noticed, a door that had stayed closed for years. One of the officers reached for the handle. There was a pause, not because the door was locked, but because something about that moment felt final. When the door opened, no one spoke. The room inside was small, plain, quiet, and yet the air felt different. The officers stood still. They looked, and then they looked again. No one reached for a radio. No one asked a question, because whatever they were seeing didn't need words. Outside, the neighborhood remained calm. Cars passed by. Lights flickered on in nearby homes. People went about their evening routines, unaware that inside this house, on this quiet street, everything had just changed. For years, this place had been filled with trust, with greetings over fences, with friendly conversations and shared laughter. Now it held something else, something that could not be explained in a single sentence, something that refused to fit the image everyone had accepted for so long. The silence inside that room stretched on, and in that silence, one question began to form. For 27 years, no one questioned him, and now everyone was asking the same thing. How did we all miss this? Before that door was ever opened, before police stepped inside that quiet house, there was a life that seemed almost too ordinary to question. Every morning followed the same pattern. The alarm rang at the same time each day. He got out of bed carefully so he wouldn't wake his wife. The curtains were opened just enough to let the early light in. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, filling the house with a familiar smell. They ate breakfast together at the same small table. Nothing elaborate, just routine. A few words exchanged about the day ahead. Plans made, tasks remembered, bills discussed. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like a marriage built on stability, not passion, not drama, just comfort. After breakfast, he stepped outside, locking the door behind him with a quiet click. Neighbors waved as he passed. Some stopped him to talk about the weather, about work, about nothing important at all. He listened more than he spoke. He nodded at the right moments. He smiled when expected. People liked that about him. He never interrupted, never raised his voice, never seemed rushed. In a neighborhood where people measured character by small moments, he passed every test without effort. On weekends, he helped organize gatherings, barbecues in backyards, community fundraisers, local events where everyone brought a dish and stayed longer than planned. He showed up early, stayed late, cleaned up without being asked. When someone needed help moving furniture, he was there. When a neighbor's car wouldn't start, he offered assistance. When someone needed advice, he listened carefully, then spoke calmly. People described him with the same words over and over again: reliable, calm, helpful. If trust had a face, they would have pointed to his. At home, the rhythm never changed. dinner at the same time, television on low volume, conversations that stayed light, no arguments loud enough for anyone else to hear. His wife told friends she felt lucky, not because her life was exciting, but because it was steady. She trusted the predictability, and predictability, for most people, feels safe. Psychologists often say that consistency creates comfort. When someone behaves the same way day after day, the brain stops looking for danger. Familiar actions become invisible. Patterns turn into background noise. The mind fills in the blanks with assumptions. If nothing has gone wrong before, why would it now? That belief settled over the house, the street, the community. Years passed without incident. Holidays came and went. New neighbors arrived. Old ones moved away. Through it all, he remained the same. No scandals, no sudden changes, no moments that demanded attention. Nothing about his life raised alarms, and that was the problem. No one missed the big signs, because there weren't any. What went unnoticed were the small things, the quiet details that felt harmless at the time, the moments that registered briefly, then faded away. There was a room in the house that stayed locked, not aggressively locked, not guarded, just closed. When guests visited, the door was always shut. When his wife cleaned the house, she skipped it without thinking. If anyone asked, his answer was simple. It's just storage, old work stuff, nothing worth opening. And that was enough. People accept simple explanations when there's no reason to push further. Curiosity feels rude when everything else looks fine. So the door stayed closed, and life moved on. He also had habits that belonged only to him. Time spent alone late at night, long walks without explanation, moments when he seemed mentally elsewhere, even while sitting right next to someone. He didn't hide these habits, he just didn't explain them, and no one demanded an explanation. His wife noticed the distance sometimes, not coldness, not cruelty, just space. He listened, but didn't always respond. He nodded, but his eyes seemed focused on something else. When she asked if something was wrong, he always had an answer ready. "Work's been heavy. I'm just tired. Nothing to worry about." Those answers made sense. Stress explains a lot. So does routine. People accept emotional distance when it arrives slowly. It feels less like a change and more like a phase. There was one night, years before everything came apart, when his wife paused in the hallway. The house was quiet. The lights were low. He was awake, standing still, not doing anything in particular. He didn't notice her first. For a brief moment, she felt uneasy. Not afraid, just unsure. The feeling passed quickly. She told herself it was nothing, that long days make the mind wander, and she went to bed. That's how discomfort disappears. The mind looks for explanations that protect normal life. Questioning too deeply risks changing everything, so people choose comfort instead. Friends noticed smaller things too. He rarely talked about his past. He remembered details about others, but shared little about himself. He observed more than he participated. They called him private, thoughtful, reserved, all positive words, nothing alarming. When something doesn't fit perfectly, the brain smooths the edges. It rounds off doubt until it feels manageable. That's how warning signs lose their weight. They don't vanish, they just get relabeled. Locked doors become habits, silence becomes stress, distance becomes fatigue. Years passed like that, and no one realized that one small detail, just one, would later matter more than anyone ever imagined. People often misunderstand how trust works. They think trust comes from warmth, from big gestures, from smiles and confidence, but that isn't what convinces people. People don't trust charm, They trust consistency. And he was consistent in ways that rarely draw attention. Every morning followed the same rhythm. He left the house at the same time, returned at the same hour, greeted the same neighbors with the same tone. There were no sudden changes, no dramatic shifts in behavior, nothing that forced anyone to pause and reassess. Consistency feels safe. It tells the brain there is no threat. At work, he was reliable, not ambitious, not loud, just steady. He met deadlines, followed instructions, didn't argue or complain. When problems came up, he handled them quietly. No frustration, no visible pressure. People learn to trust those who don't create friction. Calm behavior lowers questions. He also never contradicted himself. His stories stayed the same. Details didn't drift. Answers didn't change over time. When someone asked about his weekend, the response was familiar. When someone mentioned a past event, his version matched what he'd said before. That kind of stability reassures people. It signals honesty, even when no one is checking closely. He didn't over-explain. He didn't volunteer extra information. Short answers sound confident. They don't invite follow-up. And he never reacted emotionally. Praise didn't excite him. Criticism didn't upset him. If someone raised their voice, he lowered his. If tension entered the room, he stayed level. Emotional balance reads as maturity. It feels responsible. It feels trustworthy. People assume that someone in control of their emotions is also in control of themselves. Over time, his behavior trained those around him. Questions stopped forming. Curiosity faded. Doubt felt unnecessary. When you see the same person acting the same way year after year, the mind stops checking. Trust becomes automatic. And once trust becomes routine, it becomes invisible. That's why no one noticed what wasn't there. No sudden fear, no anger, no cracks under pressure, just calm repetition. But consistency can also be a mask. And when that mask finally slipped, the damage had already been done. The cracks don't always appear when you expect them. Sometimes they emerge in quiet moments where nothing seems out of place, yet everything feels slightly wrong. It started small. A phone call he didn't take. A look he thought no one was watching. For years, his routine had been flawless, predictable, reassuring. But something shifted. It wasn't an outburst. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't even a confrontation. It was the first time his wife had a feeling she couldn't explain. It happened one evening after dinner. They were sitting in the living room, the TV on, but neither of them was really watching. She noticed how he wasn't quite as present, how his mind seemed elsewhere, a subtle distance, but enough to make her pause. She didn't say anything at first. She told herself it was just a momentary thing, maybe stress from work, maybe fatigue from the long day. But when he stood up to leave the room, she watched him walk toward the hallway, and for just a second, something inside her felt uncertain. That night, he said he was going to meet an old friend. Nothing unusual there. He had done it before. But when she checked the time later, something didn't add up. It wasn't that he was out late. It wasn't even that he'd been gone longer than expected. It was that he'd never mentioned which friend he was meeting. She couldn't recall any prior mention of plans that evening. When she asked, he shrugged it off. Just someone I know from the past. Don't worry about it. But worry lingered. He didn't always give details, but this felt different, like the pieces were no longer fitting the way they should. As the days went on, the unease remained. She started noticing other small things, small changes in him. A phone call he hung up quickly, a subtle hesitation when she asked certain questions, a shift in his tone when he answered something that once had been simple. It wasn't obvious, it wasn't an outburst or an argument, but it was enough to stir suspicion in her mind. She told herself not to overthink it. She told herself that stress and routine changes were common in marriage. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. It wasn't a loud, angry break. It was a quiet one, an imperceptible disruption in a life that seemed so perfect. That night, he said he was somewhere else. The records would later disagree. The first crack was subtle, but it didn't take long for it to spread, and when the pieces started to fall into place, the picture became unrecognizable. It started with something small, something his wife couldn't have known at the time, a date on a calendar, a name in an old forgotten email thread, and then the phone records. They were nothing out of the ordinary at first glance, but when they were examined closely, one small detail stood out. A number he had called repeatedly, a number she had never seen before. It wasn't a friend from the past, it wasn't a casual acquaintance, it was someone whose name was nowhere in their shared history, someone from a time he'd never mentioned, someone who should have been a ghost, but wasn't. The more they dug, the clearer it became. There were gaps in his timeline that couldn't be explained away. A few minutes here, an hour there. A missing alibi from an evening he claimed to be out with friends. But this wasn't just about missing time. It was about where that time was spent and what was done during it. Suddenly, everything felt different. The pieces that once fit so neatly together were now floating in a disorienting pattern. And the life he thought he understood, it no longer made sense. From that moment on, nothing fit the same way again. Once doubt takes hold, it doesn't rush, it waits, it watches, and it begins to rearrange everything you thought you knew. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, no accusations. Instead, there were questions that sounded harmless on the surface. What time did you say you left work? Did you always take that route home? When did you first meet them? Each question was asked gently. Each answer was delivered with the same calm tone he had always used, but now those answers didn't settle the way they once had. She began replaying conversations in her mind, words he had said years ago, statements that once felt clear, now sounded different. Not wrong, just incomplete. She noticed how his timelines required assumptions, how certain details were never volunteered, only offered when asked, how his stories remained consistent, yet oddly hollow. Consistency once felt comforting, now it felt rehearsed. She went back through old messages, nothing alarming, nothing obvious, but there were gaps, long stretches of time with no record at all. She checked dates, compared memories, lined up events, and slowly, quietly, the inconsistencies began to gather. A meeting that ended earlier than he remembered, a weekend trip that overlapped with another obligation, a phone call placed at a time he claimed to be asleep. None of it proved anything on its own, but together it formed a pattern that refused to be ignored. Inside the house, the atmosphere changed. Conversations grew shorter, silence lasted longer, eye contact became brief. He noticed it too, but he didn't ask why, and that, somehow, made the distance grow faster. She wasn't afraid, she was confused. Confusion is heavier than fear, because fear gives you direction. Confusion leaves you suspended. She still shared meals with him, still slept beside him, still lived inside the routine they had built together. But the certainty was gone, and without certainty, even ordinary moments felt unfamiliar. The truth wasn't loud, it was quiet and waiting. Every home has spaces meant to be shared, and spaces meant to be ignored. In their house, there was one door that had always remained closed. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't disguised, it was simply off-limits. A room he referred to as storage, nothing important, nothing worth attention. Over the years, she had accepted that explanation. People are entitled to privacy, after all, even in marriage. But once doubt enters a home, privacy begins to feel different. That door became impossible to ignore. She noticed how he positioned himself when passing it, how quickly he changed the subject when it came up, how his calm tone tightened just slightly whenever it was mentioned. She didn't plan to open it at first. She told herself she was just curious. That curiosity didn't mean distrust. But curiosity has a way of demanding answers. The moment came without drama. One afternoon, the house was quiet. No voices, no movement, just stillness. She stood in the hallway longer than she meant to. Her hand rested near the handle. For a long moment, she hesitated, because once a door like that is opened, it cannot be closed again, not in the same way. She turned the handle. The door opened slowly. What waited inside did not shout, it did not shock, it did not announce itself, it simply existed. And in that instant, she understood something she had never considered before. The life she had been living was built on absence, on what was never shown, on what was always just out of reach. What they found inside would never be forgotten. After that door was opened, nothing returned to normal. Not inside the house, not inside the marriage, not inside the community that had trusted him for decades. The wife moved through her days as if the floor beneath her had shifted. Familiar rooms felt unfamiliar. Ordinary sounds felt louder than before. She questioned everything. Every shared meal, every quiet evening, every memory she had once described as safe. Trust, once broken, does not shatter loudly. It dissolves slowly, leaving behind confusion instead of clarity. She wondered how much of her life had been real, how many moments she had misunderstood, how many signs she had explained away because believing was easier than doubting. Guilt followed close behind. Guilt for ignoring discomfort. Guilt for choosing peace over questions. Guilt for trusting someone who never gave a reason not to be trusted. Outside the home, the community struggled to process the same realization. Neighbors replayed conversations in their minds. Friends remembered favors he had done. Colleagues recalled his calm presence at work. Everyone asked themselves the same quiet question: how did we miss this? There were no clear answers, no single moment that could be pointed to and labeled as the mistake, no warning that felt obvious in hindsight. Just years of familiarity, years of routine, years of trust layered carefully on top of one another. Some people felt anger, others felt disbelief, many felt shame for having defended him when doubt first appeared. And still, despite everything that had surfaced, the story refused to feel complete. There were gaps no explanation filled, questions no one could answer with certainty, details that sat unresolved, waiting for meaning. The house remained standing, the door remained open, but understanding never fully arrived. And still, one question refused to disappear. Trust is one of the first things we learn as humans. We trust patterns, we trust routines, we trust people who remain the same. Familiarity feels safe, consistency feels honest, but sometimes what feels safe is simply what we stop questioning. This story isn't only about deception, it's about how easily trust becomes habit, and how habit can replace awareness. The most unsettling part isn't what was discovered, it's how long it went unnoticed. So here is the question that lingers. Do you think she ever truly knew him, or did she choose not to look? In the next episode, we uncover the signs no one recognized until it was too late. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done differently? And if you want to continue this story, subscribe for episode 2.